Hello folks and welcome to a special kind of video. Today I want to share my patch suggestions for the next Warcraft 3 patch. Now, that being said, I don't want to lift anyone's expectations up too high. I don't know if there's going to be a patch. I don't know if there's something we can expect in the future. But the latest patch has been out for quite some time, 1.32.10. The headhunter patch, if you will, and I think it would be wonderful to have a new patch. And as you guys may know, I've had some patch note suggestions in the past, and here now I have compiled a new list, a new document with a lot of changes, of which I think they would be beneficial to the game. Of course, that's just my opinion. It's impossible to say if they really would work out, if they really would be good, if they would be too good or too bad, you know, if they would do enough or too much, I should say, in certain directions. Yeah, I can tell you already, it's a long document. This might be a long video, we'll see. It's a lot of suggestions, 13 pages. We're gonna go through them in a moment, bit by bit. Just want to give a short intro here. Yeah. I did some patch review videos in the past, and I shared some suggestions in the past, but this is perhaps the biggest video yet. Yeah, we'll see. I was on the fence kind of about it, if I wanted to share these patch notes, because last time I did, I got a lot of flack and a lot of angry people yelling at me. It was kind of Neo who convinced me to do this video, share the patch notes, and you know, share it with the world. I imagine quite a few people are gonna be mad at me, but that's okay. Yeah, I also hope this might spur some kind of a conversation of what you people think out there, what some good changes might be to perhaps get some sort of a consensus. What is a direction we may want to move in? You know, get the ball rolling in a kind of conversation. I thought about these patch notes a lot. I think many of them are very reasonable, and some of them are very daring. Some of them are a little bit on the wild side that I'm not sure if they would actually exactly work out well, but I think they are very promising and could lead to a very interesting new nuances in the game. All right, that's it for the intro. Without much further ado, let's jump into it. So, here we go. On the first page, I just kind of basically talk about it's been some time since the patch, and mostly with my suggestions here, I'll be focusing on two things. Firstly, the most important thing is addressing the imbalanced matchups, and I think that's pretty easy to do. That's the most important. We have 4 imbalanced matchups right now. Fixing those is the most important. And then secondly, the secondary, but also I think important part of the patch notes will be to introduce, not introduce new skills, but buff skills that are underused, units that are underpowered, to enrich the meta, to enable more strategic variety. So essentially, nerf some things that are too strong and buff a lot of things that are too weak. And also, I got some rework suggestions in here every now and then. Imbalanced matchups, by the way, are Nightelf versus Orc, being favored for Nightelf, Orc versus Undead, being favored for Orc, Orc versus Human, being favored for Orc, and Undead versus Human, being favored for Undead. I imagine that's the first point in the video where people are gonna be fuming, saying like, bah, 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 bah. You're so wrong. It's totally not true. But I think this is true. I think this is has been substantiated plenty of times over the last year, would be my opinion. And I think also this is sort of consensus in the community, if I judge, you know, what I've seen in the past. All right, here we go. So we start off with the most important things, the imbalanced matchups. I'm gonna try to mostly talk, you know, freely and off the cuff, but when I describe the problems with the matchups, I'm gonna actually read this description out because I think that's the best way I can summarize it. Oh, and by the way, also, I'm gonna be talking about item balance in between, which I also think is very important and should be looked at. But yeah, anyways, we started with Nightelf versus Orc. Here we go. Nightelf versus Orc has been problematic for some time now, where in many matchups the strength of the keeper has been curbed. Here it remains fierce. If the Orcs manage to play a perfect early game, meaning without losing any grunts, slowing down the keeper's creeping, and ensuring that they don't miss an aggressive AP, this matchup can turn out to be fair. However, the problem is that is almost never the case. With the strength of keeper, especially once he gets level 3, along with hunters in the early game, and the huge advantage that Ultra Vision gives, it is very easy for the Nightelf to find critical damage early and play the rest of the game with a lead. The Nightelf power in the early game must be reduced slightly to ensure that games have a better chance of moving towards a fair mid-game. Additionally, a mistake that was made in the past should be reverted. Back then, it was starting to look like Orcs were beginning to be favored in the matchup. As a response to this, the XP granted from Serpent Wards was increased, which is a nerf to Serpent Wards, of course. However, it turned out that this was only a short anomaly, and that indeed Orcs were not favored at all, so this change only made matters worse and should definitely be reverted. As you guys may remember, this was like maybe a year ago now. The Serpent Wards were viewed as too strong against Nightelf, and they were nerfed, granting more experience. And that indeed, at the time, looked like the right thing to do, because Orcs were starting to take the upper hand it was kind of ironic and sad for the Orcs. They were starting to take the upper hand in the matchup for the first time in years. And then immediately, Blizzard came in with a nerf, which was kind of crazy. So Orcs were like starting to look stronger than Nightelf for like 2 months, and then immediately got nerfed. And after that, once again, we saw the Night Elves taking the lead. And the biggest problem here is that it's so hard to play a perfect early game for Orc. Like I list here, slow down the keeper, don't lose grunts, don't miss an AP. Also ensure that the expansion for them is not too early. Very hard to do that all perfectly. It's definitely a ton harder to execute on the Orc side. And that isn't very fair. And I think Ultra Vision is the main culprit here. Ultra Vision gives Night Elves so much more vision along with the map control that they already have with Keeper and Hunts. It really boxes the Orc in and makes things too hard for the Orc in the early game. Too hard to not fall behind. So in my opinion, Ultra Vision should be locked behind tier 2 and require Tree of Ages. That means that of course their early game will be weaker, but it will be fairer in terms of difficulty to execute. And the good thing about this is, this only matters in this matchup. Only in this matchup is Nightelf too strong, and only in this matchup is Ultra Vision basically ever researched before tier 2. Because against Undead and also Human, pretty much always you see Keeper, Archer, maybe Expo, and then Hunter's Hall on the way to tier 2, and then on tier 2 you can research Ultra Vision anyways, right? In Nightelf Mirror, this might also be relevant, because Nightelf Mirror we do sometimes see Huntresses, but then again, it's mostly bears nowadays. And, by the way, I do have an idea to give Night Elves another chance of having better vision early game, even without Ultra Vision during nighttime. That's something we'll get to later. So yeah, delay Ultra Vision for the Night Elves so that the Orcs don't have too tough a time early on, especially compared to their opponents, and revert the nerf to Serpent Wards. These aren't huge changes. This especially is going to affect game feel mostly. And yeah, this is going to buff the Serpent Wards once again a little bit. I know that some Orcs have been asking for bigger buffs, more damage, better spells, this and that. But I think these two subtle changes should be enough. All right, we move on to the second problematic matchup. And again, I'm going to read the description here first. Orc vs. Undead has been slightly Orc favored for nearly 15 years now, where in the past the Blade Master was the problem. Nowadays it is the headhunters. It has become very apparent that the Orcish ranged units were slightly overbuffed throughout the last number of patches. This is evident to see in the matchup against Human and Undead, and even in Orc Mirror. So nerf is required. However, it is important. Should I do this, by the way, or is this distracting? I don't really read like this, so I guess not. However, it is important to make the appropriate change here. We want to nerf headhunters in a way to make them more fair, but still ensure that they are strong enough to see play in the future. We do not want them to fall back into the abyss of irrelevance. The biggest problem seems to be that headhunters are incredibly cheap for how good they are. Compared to any other early game unit, they are insanely cost effective, which allows Orc early on to have a big advantage when it comes to both fighting and creeping. So I would say that their cost certainly must be increased. That, however, would not be enough. They are so strong that another slight nerf is required. There are a few stats one can target here: damage, attack speed, range, HP, and HP, I guess. I would suggest HB, especially messing with range or attack speed would make them feel very different all of a sudden, and alienate a lot of players who have been playing the strategy for a long time. Reducing HB would encourage players to try to hunt them down early, leading to a more aggressive and more exciting, enjoyable meta. Alright, that's kind of a long description. I mean, this is something that everyone clearly sees, right? Headhunters are definitely a bit too strong. This has become absolutely apparent. They have taken over the meta. They are ever present against human, against undead. They are a balance concern, and they put Orc ahead a bit too much. And even an Orc mirror, for the most part, it's only headhunters nowadays. What we want to see is more diversity in Orc playstyle. We want to see headhunters and Blade Master at the same time. So as I said here in the description, it's important to nerf the headhunters a bit because they're too strong, a little bit too strong, but don't nerf them too much. We don't want to go back to the meta where only Blade and Krunz can be playable. And it's tricky to find the right balance here. It's tricky to find exactly the right adjustments numerically to make them a bit weaker and a bit fairer, but still strong enough to be playable and to be, as good as any other strategy that Orcs can play, but not forcing them into only headhunters anymore. So, my suggestion is, because I primarily think that they're too cheap, whether it's early game, mid game, late game, headhunters can always be played, and they're super cost efficient, of course, especially with a tier 3 upgrade, but even without. In my opinion, the most important change to them is to make them more expensive, and 10 gold here is what I suggest to increase the cost by. I think that seems reasonable. The second is the HP reduction, and that one I'm not so sure about as the gold cost. I think headhunters are, especially with the tier 3 upgrade, perhaps a bit too tanky. Normally, Orc is supposed to be tankier and have, the burly, brawly frontline that's hard to deal with, but having one or two weaker units, lower HP units, should also be fine. It's of course a ranged unit, so it's supposed to be sort of fragile, and it's still only 2 supply. It's still only 150 gold, if the gold cost was increased, so it would still be cheap. Minus 15 HP also isn't that huge, so it's percentage-wise less than 5% HP, right? 10% would be like 35 HP. 15. Wait, what am I saying? 10% would be like 35 HP exactly, and 15 HP would be less than 5%. So it's a small HP reduction and a small gold cost increase. These two small nerfs, I think, would hit the mark. But it's hard to tell exactly what the right thing to target here is. I've heard other people saying reduce the damage, reduce the production time. That's also viable, but I would prefer to see HP reduced because, in my mind, this increases the probability of aggressive early game playstyles if the opponent wants to hunt them down, punish their lower HP, and usually the more aggressive the meta is, the more enjoyable it is. So this is what I would land on. Also, something to note, which not everybody knows, by the way, headhunters and archers have almost the same DPS. It's almost exactly the same, if they're standing still, that is. With kiting, headhunters have a bit of an advantage because they have a better base attack time. But, a lot of people think that headhunters have way more DPS than their counterparts. But it's not exactly true. Archers almost have the same. But archers are way more frail. That is the big difference. And they don't have, Berserker upgrade and stuff. So yeah, this is what I would suggest. But I'm not 100% certain that especially this one is the one that has to be made. I would certainly be open for suggestions, other ones to nerf the Headhunter. But, we all know it has to be nerfed by a little bit. All right, we're moving on. This one is basically the same, Orc versus Human. I say it here, Orc versus Human has basically exactly the same issues as Orc versus Undead, and the main culprit here is very clearly also the Headhunter. So nerfs are indeed needed, and it's the same nerfs, obviously. Yeah, Fasty Headhunter, especially in this matchup, still terrifying. The Undeads may have found a new way to adjust with the DK Ghoul build, but it's only going to be a matter of time until Orcs have adjusted to that one, and I imagine will take the lead again. Yeah, Headhunters, I say it again, just simply a bit too strong. Something I've noticed also, which really surprised me, a lot of online discussions about the Headhunter problem, was also suggestions for Farseer nerfs. And I completely do not agree with that, and I don't understand it. It seems very apparent. I mean, we've seen Farseer grunt strategies in the past, especially against human, sometimes against undead, mostly against human. And the Farseer was never the problem. The strategy was never OP. Farseer and grunts never were an issue, balance-wise, concern-wise. It's only with the introduction of the Headhunters that this all happened. So I think it's very, very, very clear that Headhunters are the problem, not the Farseer. So I would definitely not suggest a Farseer nerf, just because some people were advocating for that. All right, and the fourth and final problematic balance matchup, Undead versus Human. I will read this description once again. Undead versus Human is another one of these matchups that has been problematic for a long time, with Undead being favored. However, in this matchup specifically, it goes beyond just balance, as the meta is not healthy and should be nudged into a certain direction. What I mean by that, fast expanding strategies are only fun and entertaining if the opposition can also manage to counter expand. We see that in Human versus Nightelf, where the human expands first, the Nightelf follows up, and then there's a fascinating dynamic that plays out on the map. In this matchup, it is a different story. Whereas in the past, Undeads were able to expand themselves with the help of the Crypt Lord, this has now changed. The Crypt Lord is no longer strong enough, and DK Fiend aggressive play is the go-to once more. Which means that Undeads always have to play all-ins against the human expansion. This is not fun, not enjoyable. Neither for the players nor for the viewers. So there are two things that we should try to achieve with the changes here. Firstly, we want to buff human a little bit to even the playing field. And secondly, we want to strengthen expansions on both sides to encourage more 2-base versus 2-base play. As the intention here will be to improve the meta along with improving overall balance, a lot more changes will be required. Yeah, as you saw, for the first three problematic matchups, I think just small little tweaks are going to be sufficient. Here, like I say, it's going to be a bit different. DK Fiend pressure and all-in play with Lich and mostly Pit Lord is the meta we've been seeing for years. I actually wrote this text like a few months ago, maybe 2 months ago. Funnily enough, we've been seeing more expansion play lately, especially by Happy, with Lich Fast Expo. If that's going to be viable in the long term, unclear. But before that, it was mostly only DK pressure all-in strategies, and that's very boring. If the all-in succeeds, you win the game. Game's over fast. If the all-in fails, you lose the game. It's very binary. It's very, very dull. I reference Nightelf versus Human here, who is the prime example. 2-base games are so much better. Always so much more enjoyable. And this is why I strongly advocate for buffing the 2-base versus 2-base play, and also, in conjunction, nerfing the Undead 1-base push strat. And these are the changes that I suggest for it. Make Animal War training available on Tier 2. This means that if the human fast expands, the Undead is trying to push, while they're taking to Tier 3, which is always a race for them, they can upgrade Animal War training for the Knights before they can even make the Knights. This would be a big buff in defending, especially this push from the Undead when every second counts. Whereas in 2-base, we have a lot more time to macro up. This hardly matters. So I think this would be a good change to, again, encourage 2-base play. Increase Paladin movement speed from 290 to 320. This is, I think, one change that could go the longest, the farthest, for improving variety in the meta. I think somewhere I mentioned human first heroes, but I guess it wasn't here. Human, unfortunately, has the toughest time at the moment choosing between differing first heroes. For first heroes, especially one stat is very important, movement speed. You want to be able to run away if you have to. You want to be able to chase for kills if you can. And in general, position better, close the distance better. Movement speed is hugely important. If you think about it, it's very rare that a first hero has slower movement speed. High move speed is a giant advantage on a first hero. And the Paladin should receive more move speed, I think. Firstly, Paladin isn't really a very strong hero. He can be good, especially if he levels well and he gets to level 4 with level 2 Holy Light and level 2 Aura, or maybe 1 point of Divine Shield. Very strong. But yeah, not one of the strongest heroes. Higher movement speed, I'm not sure that it will make him viable as a first hero, but it might. And the chance here is definitely worth it. Of course, it's also going to buff him beyond just first hero play. It's also going to make him stronger as a third hero healer, second hero healer, whatever. But yeah, I think this change is appropriate. I don't know what you guys think about move speed, but I think it's a hugely, hugely important stat. I think we've realized that by now with move speed auras, so this would be a very big buff. And so much of a buff that another aspect of the hero should be nerfed, which is Divine Shield. Do I mention that here? I guess not. I'm going to mention it further down in the additional suggestions. It's kind of weird that I'm not mentioning it now, but whatever. I got to talk about it later. All right, moving on. This video is already taking some time. Reduce the mana cost of Impale from 100 to 90. Would be the next suggestion. This is one of the few undead buffs here. Once again, this buffs something that is 2-base versus 2-base play related. Cryptlord, 2-base. This would not help at all with the 1-base boring meta of, normal undead pressure. Cryptlord was, of course, a very hot topic. When he first got buffed, he was way over buffed. And then he received some more nerfs. The beetles were nerfed. They're now in a good place. The Impale was nerfed super hard with big damage reduction. And Impale is a bit too weak now, in my opinion. If you think about it, Stomp 90 mana, Clap 90 mana, Shockwave 90 mana, and especially Stomp and Clap, I would still certainly argue are better than Impale. So I think Impale, it's good that the extreme power that it had was reduced. It was too strong in terms of a one-cast effect. So the fact that it was weakened was correct, that was right, but I think also the mana cost has to be reduced because now the spell is a lot less potent than it was before. As we see most of the time nowadays, Cryptlord not really the big pick anymore. So yeah, I think this would be the appropriate change to put the Cryptlord in a very good spot balance-wise. All right, decrease Arcane Tower build time from 50 to 40 seconds. This again means that when you're expanding, you get the Arcane Tower up early. The window for the undead to do big damage and for you to be able to defend better is... the window for them to do damage is smaller and you can defend better. Again, this strengthens expansion play, the big goal that I want to see here. Strengthen expansion play, sort of on both sides, and also make human a bit stronger in general. All right, and the next one, the thing is, I am a big fan of the Cryptlord. I know that a lot of people have a sour aftertaste after the Cryptlord meta, but I think it can be a really good hero if it's in the right place. So again, here I go towards the Cryptlord. Spiked Carapace might be the worst ability in the game. It's either Spiked Carapace or Mana Shield. Has to be one of the two. And yes, Spiked Carapace is just awful. So my suggestion is this would be definitely a noticeable buff, to give the ability another effect of granting bonus HP regen for the Cryptlord only, of course. And there will be 1.5, 3, and 4.5 HP regen per second. And I don't know if this would be good enough to encourage people to move away from either Impale or Beetles. Impale and Beetles are both pretty effective and can be used very well. This is just a passive that could be hardly relevant if the Cryptlord doesn't get attacked. But I think it should be a big goal for every spell to be pretty strong. For there to be situationally the right moment for people to choose different skill builds. That's, for example, the cool thing about a Shadowhunter, or about a Warden, or even about a Blade Master, or about a Mountain King. If you can choose different builds depending on the situation to properly adjust. And if there's one spell in the kit that is just complete trash, it's a shame. It's a wasted opportunity. So this will be a continuous theme in my patch notes here. Heavily buff very underpowered abilities. And this is the first one that I mentioned here. All right, next one. Increase Carrion Swarm level 2 damage from 125 to 140. And its damage cap from 700 to 840. This would be a big buff to the Dreadlord. And this again is encouraging more 2-base play. With the Dreadlord, you can't play 1-base, it's completely terrible. You can play 2-base though, you can play a fast expansion. Dreadlord, on the pro level, is not really viable. Maybe every blue moon in Undead Mirror, maybe. Happy has done it recently, once. But Happy is happy, so who knows. The Dreadlord very clearly is not a very strong hero, so he could need a bit of a buff, in my opinion, to make him more viable. Again, I want to make all heroes viable. I want to make all spells viable. We have this huge kit of units and heroes that we don't have to be too crazy, you know, to change, to make relevant. Just buff them to make them competitive. And that could open up all sorts of new variety. So that is, why I think the level 2 Carrion Swarm should be buffed a bit. Level 3 Carrion Swarm is definitely strong enough. That doesn't have to be buffed. Level 1 Carrion Swarm is pretty crap, but, you know, all AoE abilities on level 1 are pretty crap, so that's fine. But on level 2, I think it needs a bit of a buff. Well, honestly, this will be more than a bit of a buff. This is around, how much is this percentage-wise? It's about 10%, a bit more than 10% damage increase. That's a big deal. And that's a lot of help that the Dreadlord, excuse me, could use. Additionally, because the Dreadlord always has the issue, he's going to run out of mana. Sooner or later, he's going to run out of mana, and because he's fast expanding, he can't get statues or mana potions for a long time. So this buff is only helpful for the first 3 Carrion Swarms, maybe. After that, you're completely out of mana. So I think, even though this is a big buff, I don't think it's enough. I think the Dreadlord needs a bit more help. And something that we saw before in other patches that really helped out some heroes was stat increases. The Panda, for example, got +1 strength and +1 intelligence, and that helped him a lot. The thing about that is, strength and intelligence are both great for the Panda. It's more mana regen, a little bit. It's a bit more damage from strength, and it's a bit more HP from strength, obviously. For the Dreadlord, I would suggest increasing his agility, which is a bit counterintuitive, because what he wants usually is HP and damage and mana. And this gives him none of that. But it is still kind of helpful. It's not that big of a deal. For agility, I don't know how much you guys know about the stats, but what that means for agility is 1.2 armor and around 6% attack speed. Agility is kind of weird with the attack speed increase, but it's like 5 or 6% attack speed. So it wouldn't be a big buff, but it would be a slight stat buff to him. And yeah, I think that's interesting to see how that would affect the hero and playstyle in general if the agility was increased. It sounds like a lot, I know that, going from 16 to 20, that's 4 more agi, but again, it's a very negligible stat on the Dreadlord, as he doesn't get much benefit from it. Yeah, I think this would be a good way to go. But yeah, I imagine here, people are gonna be up in arms. Moving on. Decrease Necropolis build time from 90 to 80 seconds, and Necropolis gold cost from 225 to 200 gold. This is especially in the late game for Undead an issue if they can't place a Necropolis too easily to counter expand. Normally in the early game, this shouldn't be too relevant because you need a skull and a ziggurat anyways. This should make it, again, a bit more easy for the Undead to counter expand. Again, buffing expansion is better. And I know that some Night Elves might be concerned here because they're already sometimes having to deal with fast expansion of the Undead. But this is still not gonna encourage too many Undeads to make a Necropolis because the Ziggurats are just so cost effective, because the Nether Tower is so effective, and it's just cheaper gold-wise still, and it's faster. It would certainly be a noticeable buff, but it goes in the right direction. Like I said, I think, expansion play, we want to see more of that. Alright, and now some more human buffs. Reduce Staff of Sanctuary gold cost from 250 to 200 in an expansion, 2-base play. This might not be too big of a deal, 50 gold, not that much, but every little bit of gold still helps. And a very nice benefit for this, something else that I'm trying to target is Human Mirror. I really, really, really want to see Human Mirror move away from mass breakers. So this could help maybe in Human Mirror if the staff was cheaper, if you get rewarded more for going tier 3, right? And this is in the same vein. The orb, tier 3 orb, the Orb of Fire, which is the weakest in the game, needs a buff. The effect of reducing healing is very strong against Undead, but against the rest of the matchup, it's not really that big of a deal. So what always helps? Damage always helps. We know that from Todd's streams, right? We love the Flute of Accuracy, we love the Warsong Battle Drums. More damage is always good. And yeah, just give it more damage. I don't know if you guys remember, but a few years ago, the Orb of Fire was plus 10 damage, and then it was reduced back to 7. And this was one of the big mistakes by the Blizzard balance team. The Orb of Fire was in a good spot. With plus 10 damage, the effect is weaker than most other orbs, so it needs more damage. It's very logical. But they removed it, they reduced it back to 7. I don't know why. Maybe because we saw some funny, wacky games where a pit lord bought like 4 orbs of fire. that was kind of crazy. But that's not something we should shy away from. Weird, wackiness, craziness, that's something we want to see, unless it's really a balance problem. That needs to be addressed, of course. But it wasn't. The Pit Lord Mass Orb of Fire was not a balance problem, so I'm still a bit mad at Blizzard that they nerfed this back to 7. That was a mistake. So yeah, buff it back up to plus 10 damage, and again, this could help Human Mirror. If you go tier 3, you get rewarded more, right? And here, reduce the Siege Engine HP. This is the only nerf to Human that I suggest here. Because tanks, aka Siege Engines, are one of the biggest problems for Undead to play that 2-base versus 2-base style. If there's 2 tanks in the main, 2 tanks at the expansion, something's dropping in with a Zep. This is something that is oftentimes too hard to deal with, and tanks are just very cancer in the first place. Very, very annoying to play against. It goes against the philosophy of Warcraft 3, where it's about perfect execution and cool micro moves. Tanks have like 0 micro. And I know they've been nerfed before, but I think they should be nerfed again. Reduce their HP by a little bit less than 10%. And this I think might be the most important thing here, time to nerf Banshees. Fiend, Banshee, Destroyer, that's the army we always see, but we can't nerf Fiends, because Fiends are needed everywhere. And we could nerf Destroyers maybe, but that's not the biggest problem, I think. Banshees are too strong, and I forgot to include one thing here that I'll talk about later. Anyways, Banshees are too strong. So, in my opinion, what should be nerfed about them is Anti-Magic Shell, a very, very, very powerful ability that is also oftentimes needed for the Undead, needs to be weakened. It absorbs 300 magic damage, very strong, and lasts 90 seconds. That's way too long. That's way too long. For such a strong buff, this is way too long. We need to reduce it to 60 seconds to put more mana stress on the Banshees, and also for humans to have an opportunity to turn a fight around. Let's say they're brawling, let's say they're fighting, they're kiting, some possessions come off, you staff it out with a staff, or maybe the Stormbolt flies, you can cancel it, and the fight drags on, 1 minute has gone by, and then boom, all the anti-magic shell is gone. This is definitely going to make things better for the human, and I think it's very appropriate. Secondly, second nerf to the Banshee. These are 2 big nerfs that I think the Banshee does deserve, though. Increase the duration of the channel time of Banshee's possession from 4.5 to 6 seconds. At the moment, it takes 4.5 seconds to possess a unit. This would increase it to 6 seconds. That's a big nerf. It's a very big nerf, to be honest. It's a 33% increase in channeling time. This gives way more opportunity for the opponent to cancel the possession through items or through skills, and also way more time to kill them with mortar teams, for example. This might make possession pretty bad. It might make it very bad. I'm not sure about this, but I think it's appropriate. The Banshee's first 2 spells are already so good. anti-magic and curse are both super strong, and possession needs to be way weaker. Maybe it even needs to be a bad spell, but it needs to be way weaker. Also, the problem, of course, is knights are supposed to be countering the fiend army, and then banshees counter the knights too easily. So yeah, these are the two big banshee nerfs that I think are needed. In case you guys don't know, I'm an undead player, but I try to be objective, and I think this is necessary. I try to be not too partial to my race. And one more nerf that I forgot to include here is about statues. Statues are honestly very needed for undead, and they're also a good unit because you can play all kinds of different strategies with a statue. It doesn't pigeonhole you into one strategy, but still, statues are a bit too strong, in my opinion. They need to be strong. They're the backbone of the undead army, but they're a bit too good for their cost, in my opinion. Yeah, I forgot to include this here, but basically, I have this somewhere down here in the list. Basically, it's increase the gold cost. Statues at the moment are 200 gold. I think that's cheap. I think that's way too cheap. It should be 225 gold, and then they should fit their power level better with their cost. All right, that's it for the problematic matchups. And I think I have to pick up the pace a bit here because we're already more than half an hour in. Yeah, this was just the problematic matchups. Now I move on to units and aspects and stuff of the game that are either too strong or create a balance, or what's the term? They create game design issues and strategic bottlenecks, I guess. Meaning they are too good against certain things, and because of that, too many things are unplayable, or they're just simply too strong. All right, let's jump in. I'm going to again read some of these descriptions, because I think that's the best, probably I can summarize it. And here we go. There are a number of heroes, units, and abilities in the game that are just by pure virtue of their own effectiveness too strong. They may not all exactly hugely negatively impact matchup balance, but they are still in need of some reining in because of the extreme power level that they possess. And in some cases, because of their restrictive design nature. I expressed it better here. Yeah, restrictive design nature especially. All right, first point. I have a couple of points here. There's a huge difference for second and third heroes between altar and tavern purchases. While the altar heroes require 55 seconds to be built, the tavern counterparts are hired instantaneously, which is a gigantic advantage, of course. In addition to that, the hero arrives at the tavern in the middle of the map, not in a player's base, which is almost always a big advantage. The game tries to compensate for this by having an increased lumber cost for the tavern hero at 135 instead of the usual 100 lumber, but this is entirely not enough to properly reflect the advantage inherent in the situation. To balance things out more appropriately, the gold cost also has to be higher for tavern heroes, i.e. tavern heroes should cost 425 and altar heroes 400 gold. This is something that has bugged me for a long time. This was a huge balance oversight by Blizzard. The fact that one kind of hero you can get at the tavern instantly costs the same as one that you make at home that takes at least a minute longer until it joins your army. That is very unfair, and we see that, I guess, mostly play out in Nightelf versus human, but you can also think about other scenarios where the keeper can hire the panda at the tavern and has way more tempo right away in the mid game on tier 2. The human tech's slower already, and if they want to go for MK or Blood Mage, it's so hard to do because they're so much slower. 1 minute of production time is a huge difference maker. That's a big reason why humans have been playing a lot of panda second lately in that matchup. So yeah, this is just philosophically a big error. The heroes at the tavern have to be more expensive, not just in lumber, but in gold. And that is why I suggest this. Reduce the gold cost of altar heroes for second and third hero, like I say here. Another tiny addition to this is also, this means that if you go tier 2 and you go for a second hero from your main, you save 25 gold. And if you go tier 3, you go for a second hero from your main, then you save 50 gold. So if you go for triple hero triple hero tier 3 play, you save 50 gold, which is not a big deal, but it might again encourage more tier 3 play. And that's what we want to see. Tier 3 is always more interesting than tier 2 only. All right. Next point. And I imagine this might be the one that people get mad about most. But let me make my case. So I suggest, give Kodo Beast's Devour ability a limitation of being only able to devour 3 or less supply units. That means, for example, rifles can be eaten, but knights cannot be eaten. No knights, no A-bombs, no Taurens. They cannot be devoured anymore. This would be certainly a big nerf to the Kodo, at least against certain strategies. But this is the argument I make. The Kodo Beast is already a very strong unit, as it grants bonus damage to the entire army, whilst also being able to take out one unit entirely. The fact that they can entirely nullify more than 240 plus gold and 4 plus supply in the form of Knights, A-bombs, Torrents, and even worse, 350 gold and 7 supply in the form of Mountain Giants is too much. Especially in Orc Mirror, we are unfortunately very often stuck on tier 2, unable to enjoy the more interesting tier 3 dynamics. And the Kodo's ability to devour torrents is one big reason for that. Kodo Beasts are simply too restrictive in their design nature. Their ability alone eliminates so many strategic options, which is not healthy for a strategy game. For that reason, the Devour ability has to be nerfed to exclude those high supply targets. This would severely weaken Orc against Knights, A-bombs, Bears, and Torrents. To compensate for this, Spirit Walkers should have their damage increased from 17 to 25, by 2, basically. Spirit Walker damage increased by 2, which would be a 10% damage increase, which is a lot. This is a bit of a risky change. I will admit that, but I think it would be a good one to do. It is always annoying when, because of one single unit, you can never make any of another unit in a matchup, because it just so incredibly hard counters it. In Orc Mirror, for example, you can never, ever, ever, ever make Wyvern, because bats are way too good against Wyvern. It's impossible. You can never make Wyvern because of that. In the case of the Kodo, it's even worse. It doesn't just counter one unit completely. It counters one entire type of unit completely. The big tier 3 tank is completely disabled. It's completely unplayable. Bears, not playable. A-bombs, not playable. Knights, not playable. Mountain Giants, maybe with the upgrade. But don't really see that either. Torrents also pretty much unplayable. See it very rarely, but not really. So this is too restrictive. Remember what I talked about earlier? Too restrictive game design-wise. Kodos eliminate too many possibilities. So I think this is a healthy change. As I said, it's a big nerf, obviously, for Orc against these units that I mentioned before. So a damage increase to walkers should be happening at the same time to give them good magic damage against these units. Plus also, walkers seem to be a bit weak at the moment. Something that I just thought of now, what should probably be changed, if this is included, if this is done, then the Kodos, when they're devouring, should not give vision to the opponent anymore. Probably. That would balance things out then. That would balance things out with Devour being limited, but at least not giving vision to the opponent anymore. I think that would make sense. Alright, moving on. Make control magic require castle tech and reduce Spellbreaker HP from 600 to 570. Spellbreakers are very cool and interesting units, but also somewhat stifling to strategic variety. This is especially true for Human Mirror, where mass Spellbreakers have been suffocating the meta for the last 15 years. In order to allow more diversity in the mirror, the control magic upgrade needs to be moved back to tier 3, so that the player who is trying to reach the tier 3 stage will not simply get overrun and have his summons turned against them by the aggressive tier 2 player. In addition to that, this would also help out Orc versus Human, where the Farseer is oftentimes entirely useless in the late game thanks to Breakers being able to steal his wolves. Now this would of course be a slight nerf to Human in that matchup, but it would be appropriate at the same time as long as the TC's aura gets slightly nerfed as well, which it should, along with the troll headhunters. And the best thing about this change is that in the matchup where control magic is needed most, against Cryptlord, it would be no problem to move it to tier 3, as human in that matchup always rushes castle anyways. And we want to keep in mind that we always want to disincentivize the meta of mass magic immune units and the boring games that come along with that as much as possible. Hence the HP reduction. And this right here is one of the things that I most strongly hold to in all of Warcraft 3. Massing of lots of magic immune units is super dull and something that should be disincentivized as much as possible. I can still remember times when mass destroyers was the norm in Undead Mirror. That was before they were nerfed in terms of damage and HP. After that, it became better. But there was a time when we saw only mass destroyers against each other. With Dryads, it's also a bit dumb to just see mass Dryads, but at least Dryads die quickly. Then it's not that bad, but it's still annoying if your hero's spells don't do anything because the units are completely magic immune. Yeah, as I say, with Dryads, it's not that terrible because they die fast, but with Destroyers in the past, it wasn't like that, and with Breakers also, it's not like that. If you've ever seen a late game human versus orc, you will have noticed that the Breakers don't die easily at all, and once you have a lot of Breakers and a strong MK, balance flips around. So I think an HP reduction is needed to disincentivize the massing of Breakers. And the castle tech for tier 3 is mainly to, again, help Human Mirror. You want to be incentivized more in Human Mirror to go tier 3. The problem is, if you're playing a tier 3 tech against a tier 2 player, he can also get the control magic, steal your water elementals, and pressure you even more. So this is something, yeah, that needs to be done, in my opinion, to especially help Human Mirror, but also simply remove the mass breaker possibility. Mass Dryads, mass Destroyers, mass Breakers shouldn't be good. Having 2 or 3, or maybe 4, or maybe 5 is okay. But if it's strong, to have 10 or 12 of a magic immune unit is bad. It's bad game design. So, nerf needed. While, of course, humans are getting many other buffs at the same time. You've seen some of those already, and I'm going to mention some more later. All right, moving on. And this is very much similar to what we talked about before. Decrease the Demon Hunter mana burn range from 300 to 250, but buff Immolation, as outlined below, to compensate. I don't mention Immolation here. I love Immolation. I think it's an amazing spell. It's super cool. It's flashy. It's exactly what a hero's ability should be. Super fun and super flashy. The problem is, it is way too weak. So I advocate for ultra buffing Immolation, but nerfing mana burn. And the reason is, mana burn is super unfun. It is extremely annoying if you're playing against Demon Hunter and you can never use your spells. Using spells is kind of the coolest thing about Warcraft 3. Mana burn is a mechanic that has been removed from most competitive games nowadays by, this point in history in gaming. People have realized mana burn is pretty damn annoying, especially if it has almost no counterplay. So yeah, mana burn, not fun, and perhaps the bigger problem, it's extremely restrictive. Remember the Kodo Beast? Remember the Breakers? Very restrictive units and heroes are not good. You don't want to entirely eliminate so many possibilities of army compositions and strategies by the opponent just simply by having a certain hero or a unit or a spell, right? So, this is how I describe it. The Demon Hunter is, much like the Kodo Beast, too restrictive when it comes to strategic variety. Because of his ability to quickly obliterate a hero's entire mana pool, he excludes 80% of hero choices that the opponent has the ability to choose from. This is very unhealthy for the game and truly not the best game design. With the mana burn range reduced, at least the Demon Hunter would have to enter a greater risk when going in for the mana burn. And while this would certainly be a big nerf to the hero, it would be justified and healthy for the game. Plus, we would make up for it with a huge Immolation buff detailed further down below. Yeah, that's basically what I just said. And can't wait for Starshape to read this. Mr. Starshape, who's always very reasonable about the strengths of Nightelf. But yeah, as I said, mana burn is too restrictive, too annoying, too anti-fun, just like tanks. And nerf that, but buff other stuff. Ultra buff Immolation. I want to see it. Alright, next point. Reduce Torn Chieftain's Endurance Aura movement speed from 10, 20, 30 to 10, 75, 25. This happened the last patch with the DK's Aura, and it's the right thing to do. And here I will describe why. Movement speed is a massive deal and has much more of an influence than Blizzard probably thought when initially making the game. In the last patch, this started to get addressed with the Unholy Aura. Oh, dude, I just thought my mic was muted and had been talking all this time with a muted mic, but no, we're good. We're good. Where its movement speed bonus was reduced, and that was the correct thing to do. The same should be done for the TC. Facing off against an opponent with a movement speed aura when you don't have one as human or night elf can be very frustrating. And is a little unfair if we are entirely honest. So those slight nerfs from 10, 20, 30 to 10, 17.5, 25 make a lot of sense and should also be implemented for the endurance aura. This would of course affect human versus orc the most, as it is in that matchup where the TC levels the fastest, and also where the opponent doesn't have a movement speed aura. And while that would be a slight nerf to orc there, it would be properly counterbalanced as long as control magic upgrade is moved back to tier 3. And of course headhunters have to be considered. But I think if you punch that all together, it should be fine. Alright, next one. Reduce Druid of the Claw, Bear HP form from HP. Wait, Bear Claw form HP from 920 to 960 to 920 HP. The Druid of the Claw, aka Bears, were heavily buffed in the last patch. With the increased mana starting amount of 25%, they received a ton of utility that helped to greatly empower the Night Elves. After a few months have gone by, it has now become apparent that this buff was a little too much. Night Elf Mirror is exclusively bears nowadays, which is very dull, and against undead and human, we universally see them as well. Night Elf is normally the race with which it is... Wait, what? Night Elf is normally the race which is most versatile and creative in its unit selection, but the currently overbuffed bears are single-handedly preventing a more interesting and diverse meta. In addition to the playstyle variety issue, there's also a noticeable balance component involved here, as the bears have certainly turned out to be a bit too strong in the matchups versus human. I mean, against undead, we don't really see them. It's either mass dryads or fairy dragons. This isn't exactly accurate, but whatever. And if the Kodo change will make it through, it would also be a concern against orc. For all those reasons, a slight nerf is required, and the HP should be the perfect stat to target for this, as the bears always fulfilled the role of the damage dealer and utility spellcaster in the Night Elf army, while mountain giants rather were responsible for reducing their health makes sense. To reinforce unit identity and role distribution. And yeah, this is basically going in the same vein as many of the other changes here. Units that are too strong, we want to weaken. Units that are too weak, we want to buff, right? Bears are a bit too strong. We see them way too much, especially in Bear Mirror. Potom Hunts is not playable anymore on the top level because bears are too good. Because having 2 rejuves every time a bear comes out is insanely strong. And I think that's okay. I think that especially helps Night Elves to hold pushes, right? Especially if time is of the essence. If a human is pushing in and you have double rejuve, that's good, honestly. That helps your heroes, especially if you have a panda or a demon hunter maybe. It's very good, and I think that's that was not a bad change. More mana. But if they get that much more mana, they need to have less HP. And bears can heal, they can buff the army, they have a lot of damage. Siege bears, right? So I think reducing their HP makes sense. Like I say here, the big tanks of the Night Elf army are mountain giants anyways, so reduce the HP, make them a bit fairer, encourage more diversity, yada yada. Alright, moving on. Talking about the Banshee here, you saw this nerf earlier already when I talked about the matchup against human, but I guess I'll read out the reasoning here. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I guess I kind of talked about this earlier already. Basically, AM is super strong, needs to be shorter duration. And Possession, too strong of a spell. And Banshee, too strong. Banshee, too strong, simple as that. 2 nerfs. Big nerfs, but I think appropriate. Another one, Disease Cloud. Decrease the duration of Disease Cloud from 90 to 75 seconds. Disease Cloud has proven to be a very powerful late-game weapon for the undead. Most notably against Nightelf, this is clearly felt nowadays. While the ability is interesting and unique, and fits the undead theme very well, a bit of tuning back seems to be required. Yeah, especially Night Elves with Mass Dryads have really been suffering from Disease Cloud lately. But yeah, I think it's a cool spell. I think it might even be needed against Dryads, but it's a bit too strong. A little bit too strong. So reduce the duration by 15 seconds. That is almost a 20% duration reduction. A little bit less. But I think the ability will still be good, but not as crazy as it is at the moment. And here the statues, yeah, I forgot to put it in earlier, further up against human, but here I did include it. Increase the gold cost of obsidian statues from 200 to 225. Statues are quite likely the best unit in the entire game. A bit of a nerf should be in order here. With Undead doing so well recently, this should be the right step at the right time, and hopefully additionally encourage more diverse play. Yeah, statues, very, 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 very good. The thing is, statues are hard to nerf, because you can't really reduce the HP regen from 3 to 2, because that will be a 50% nerf, or 33% nerf, I guess. That's just way too crazy. And with the HP, it's also a bit tough to manage, and especially it is the mana, kind of, that's the crazy thing. But you can't go too low with the mana, because then they're gonna be crap. So I think increasing the cost is the right thing here. Statues are not necessarily that easy to kill, but maybe it's gonna encourage players more to hunt down statues, and then get the double effect of killing them. Firstly, taking out an important unit of the undead army, and secondly, making it more expensive to replace. Yeah. So that's 3 sizable nerfs against undead. But yeah, also a couple of other nerfs here. So again, as you can see, lots of nerfs against things that are too strong or too restrictive. That was one of my goals. All right. And now, I think this is the last point for balance before I go over to creative suggestions for a more interesting meta. Item balance is what I talk about here. Let me read it. Beyond race balance, there's also another issue that needs to be addressed. Item balance. While great improvements have been made over the years, there are still a few outliers of under and especially overperforming items. Specifically early game items, slippers, circlets, etc. Can skew the game heavily in one player's favor right out the gate. For that reason especially, nerfs are in order, and in some cases buffs for items that are a little too weak for that tier. I think most of these things that I suggest here are reasonable, but the circlet is going to be a little bit more on the extreme side for some of you. We'll see. So, firstly, and this is I think the most important of the entire thing, is reduce Wand of Illusion charges from 3 to 2. Wand of Illusion is very, 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 very good. Way too good for its item tier. If you compare Wand of Illusion to Replenishment Potion or what's the other one? Lightning Shield. It's a joke. I think Replenishment Potion and Lightning Shield, they have the right power level for that tier. And Wand of Illusion is just way too good. And Sentry Wards are also too good. But Wand of Illusion is way, way too good. It's great in the early game for scouting. You can creep, manipulate, you can block. And it's also great in the late game to just have a disposable front line. Way too good. Has to be reduced from 3 to 2 charges. Secondly, Wand of Sentry Ward, yeah, also too strong. It gives you way too much vision. It's way too big of an advantage that you can deal with that info that you get. So reduce the vision range from 1600 to 1000 so that you don't see the whole map with one Sentry Ward, and make them grant 30 experience when killed. This is very important. Even with 1000 range vision, Sentry Wards will still be very good. It's still going to give you crucial intel. It's still going to help you make way better decisions. It's very strong. Killing them has to be rewarded for the opponent. If you buy a dust, you think there's a sentry, you find it, just removing the vision isn't good enough. It has to give you something else. And so it has to grant you 30 experience. I don't know how many of you guys played Dota. I imagine some did. But Dota a long time ago introduced making ward kills more rewarding. They give experience, I think quite a bit of experience in Dota, and they also even give gold in Dota if you kill them. I think making them give gold like creeps would be a bit too much. That would be a bit too extreme. But they should give experience. That's something I'm very, very firm on. All right, third point. And this one is a bit weird maybe, but this is again, just like earlier with the units, I want to make things in line. I want to have an even power level as much as it is possible. So here I talk about the circlet. Because the circlet, in my opinion, is way too good compared to the other items. The claws in the past were already nerfed. Oh, excuse me. And that was appropriate. The circlet wasn't nerfed. The circlet is still too strong. Circlet and claws are still way better than gloves and ring. And that's a problem. And the reason why I focus so much on circlet and slippers is because these items can be found very early on. Very often, you can creep 3 camps quickly. Claws, slippers on something like a Blade Master versus ring, gloves is a huge disadvantage. It's too much. It is too influential too early in the game. If later in the game, with bigger camps, you will find more discrepancy. At least you're going to have a bigger army and more game time to compensate for it. The impact that 3 items have with a 10 supply army is way bigger than the impact that 4-5 items have with a 50 supply army. Because percentage-wise, the impact of the hero is so high, I imagine. That should be pretty easy to understand. So, this is why I want to nerf the circlet. And I have 3 suggestions. One of which should be done. First one, make the circlet grant +2 to the main attribute and +1 to the secondary attribute of the hero. And reduce the cost to 125 gold. Or, secondly, and this would be the coolest option, this would be the best, but the reason why I suggest different ones here is I don't know if they're doable. I don't know if this is feasible inside the engine of Warcraft 3. But yeah, this is the best suggestion. Make the circlet +2, +1, +1, and toggleable, where the player, upon clicking it, can select which attribute is given +2, and can freely switch between the 3 states and reduce the gold cost to 125. So I was, again, inspired by Dota here. Many of you know the item Power Treads. Power Treads in Dota is boots that also give you attack speed, and they give you the main stat. And it can be strength, or agi, or intelligence. And you can toggle it. You can click it, and then it's strength. You can click it, and then it's agi. You can click it, and then it's intelligence. And you can freely go through it. And that's the cool thing. That could also be really cool here with the circlet. It would be main stat pretty much always for every hero you have. You can give it over. You can give him the main stat, you know. Yeah, I think this would be really cool. But again, I don't know if it's doable from a technical side. But this would be the best change, the best way to do it. And then another solution that I'm not too satisfied with is reduce the stats granted from circlet from 222 to +1.5, +1.5, +1.5, and again, reduce the gold cost to 125. Of course, the gold cost has to be reduced. Firstly, to make it in line with all the other items, and secondly, well, to make it in line with its power level. This would certainly be a noticeable nerf on the circlet, but again, I think it's needed, as I describe here. Note, version 1 and 2 would be much more elegant of a solution, but I'm not sure how easy those would be to implement from a mechanical standpoint. If those should prove unmanageable, then the third suggestion should be followed. But whatever the case may be, the circlet certainly needs a nerf to make it more in line with the other items of its tier, and accordingly should have its cost reduced. Yeah, I think early game items are too snowbally. They influence the game too much. They can have too much of an unfair advantage to one player compared to the other if one is lucky or unlucky. So this is why I think circlet has to be nerfed. And also claws, honestly. I think claws +5 is still too strong. I think it's still too strong. I think it should be +4. The circlet is, like with my suggestion, the circlet would be +4 stats. Like with 2-1-1. And claws would be +4 attack. I think this makes way more sense. And I think this would finally make gloves, claws, ring and circlet fair. Something that also not everybody knows, by the way, is that gloves don't actually increase attack speed by 15%. The tooltip says that it does, but it doesn't really. Some people have tested this before, and in reality, the gloves actually only increase attack speed by around 11%. And especially for a level 1 and 2 hero, claws of attack would still be more than 11. Claws of attack plus 4 would still be more than 11% attack speed. So, again, I say this now for the third time. I think claws and circlet have to be nerfed so that all items of that tier are on the same power level. And this is basically also the reason why I think gauntlet, slippers, and mantle should be nerfed from +3 to +2. And then again, the gold cost should be reduced because it just simply is a weaker item. And I think this is also relevant. I have seen a lot of games where one Demon Hunter gets 3 slippers, or let's say 2 slippers, and the other Demon Hunter gets 2 cloaks, and it's just too unfair. It's too unfair. It's too punishing to be unlucky in the early game, and in this game in general, I guess. Again, I think in the late game, there's enough ways to compensate. There's also ways to scout your opponent, react, maybe, and you're going to have an army to work with beyond that. It's not just the hero. But I think in the early game, this is too much, quite simply. So these items, quite honestly, will be a lot weaker, obviously. This is a big nerf from +3 to +2. But I think it's the appropriate thing to do. I think this would make the game a lot fairer. And, yeah. The right thing to do, in my opinion. All right. And now, finally, for a buff towards an item. Increase HP restored when revived via Ankh from 500 to 600. Ankh is not a very good item. It puts you in a weird position. You can't really ensure that the hero is going to be in the right spot when he comes back. And yeah, I think 500 HP is just simply too low. If it's a bit more HP, it's going to be better. I mean, we all know Ankh isn't the greatest item, so I think this would be appropriate, again, to make it in line with the other items of its tier. Speaking of which, give the crystal ball the additional effect of passively granting the carrier +1/+1/+1 stats. The crystal ball has some utility use. Scouting with it sometimes can be good on a 60-second cooldown. That's okay. But honestly, it's kind of a early-ish mid-game camp. You really want to have some fighting strength with the items there. Pendant is great. Claws is OP. Even Periap and Ring can be really good. Even Evasion can be really good. Whereas the crystal ball does nothing for your fighting strength. So giving it a little bit of stats, just a tome of knowledge, it's not that much, should be good and proper, in my opinion. And Mana Potion. I talk about it again. It's always the item that everyone wants from the creep camp, unless you're a Demon Hunter, then you don't. But every other time, you always want the Mana Potion, and the reason is that it's too strong. It was nerfed before. In the past, it was 300 mana, which was completely absurd. But even at 250, it's still too strong. It's too powerful. It's too strong compared to especially Scroll the Beast and one of Mana Stealing. But it's even much stronger than Big Heal Potion and Big Invo Potion in most scenarios. I realize there are rare exceptions, but very rare. Almost always, you want to have the Mana Potion because it's OP. Mana Potion needs to be nerfed. It's, again, too swingy of an item. If you find that item versus Scroll the Beast, especially if there's Dispel, it's a huge, huge advantage. So nerf is required. And increase Cloak of Flames damage by 10% is not much. Go from 10 to 11, because honestly, Cloak isn't that good of an item, but it's very cool. Things that are flashy and cool should be strong so that they're viable and good. So a little buff to the Cloak, I think, should be appropriate. Also, this would make it in line with the Immolation buff that I suggest very soon. And reduce Claws of Attack from +9 to +7. With the Claws of Attack +9, it's not as bad as with the Claws +6, because you can't find them that early. You can't get so far ahead so quickly with many items and too much damage. So it's not that impactful so often as Claws +6 or 5, but I think they should still be nerfed. I think +9 is too much. I think it should be +7 only. All right. And that is all the balance suggestions I have. I talked about matchup imbalances and item imbalances. Up until here, I think all of these things are pretty reasonable, with some things being a little bit risky. But I think up until here, everything's pretty reasonable. And I really think many of these changes should be included. Maybe not all, but many. Something I guess that I didn't say yet. These are obviously a lot of changes in general that I'm suggesting here. And obviously, some of them won't be good changes, right? I make like 100 suggestions here. And I mean, I'm just a normal, guy. I'm just a dude. So obviously I'm not perfect. Obviously, not all of this is spot on. I am aware that some of these are probably a bad idea. But I think most of them are a good idea. And I think all of them are a good idea, but obviously I will be wrong about some of them. Yeah, just something I wanted to say. As, for nobody, their perspective is always perfect, right? All right, so this was the more reasonable part and the more urgently needed part, I would say. Now we go over to the more creative suggestions. Not balance issues, but rather creative suggestions, especially buffs to units and abilities that could be needed, or are needed, I guess, to make them viable. So here we go. General ideas to improve and enrich the meta. There are a great number of abilities, units, and heroes which are quite interesting in theory, but are in actuality just way too weak and need some considerable buffs to become at all viable. Additionally, there are a few adjustments that could be made to greatly improve the enjoyment of some matchups. I will preface this by saying that some of the changes here are a bit more on the wild side and could certainly require some testing first. But I truly do believe that they might lead to exciting new playstyles and strategic possibilities. And I have a couple of suggestions here for all the races and for the neutral stuff. And we start with Orc. Increase burning oil full damage from 12 to 15 and medium damage from 3 to 5, and increase the duration from 2.5 to 4 seconds. Demolishers are very bad. Burning oil is also very bad. So it needs buffs to be good. Disease Cloud, Wagons are very strong. Frag Charge, Mortar Teams are very strong. And I think that's cool to have like a tier 3 upgrade for your siege weapon that makes it very strong. With Glaives, it's not really doable because Glaives are tier 1 units that are available too early. And they are super low HP because they have to be super low HP. So I think, unfortunately, there's no way to make Glaives really good in the late game. But there certainly is a way to make Demolishers good in the late game, and that is with big buffs. And this would be a huge buff. This would be such a huge damage increase. If you think about the medium damage and the full damage. Oh, by the way, what that means is full damage means standing right in the middle of the burning thing, of the smoldering ground. And the medium damage is a little bit more on the outskirts, where it does less damage. Where it's, what is that? 25%? Yeah, it was 25%. And also, the duration over which it does damage, which was 2.5% in the 2.5 seconds in the past, would be increased to 4 seconds. So, this would be a huge damage increase, which I think is needed to make the Demolishers good. Now, and this goes for a lot of the things here, a lot of these changes would need testing to really see how strong it would be. So, numerically, where I land here, this in my head makes sense, but it's very hard to tell if in the end this would be appropriate. All right. Secondly, make Farsight give the Farseer an attribute buff, which could, for instance, be called Serenity, that grants him +4, +8, and +12 intelligence for 12 seconds upon casting the ability. Yeah, Farsight is one of the worst spells in the game, clearly. So it has to give the Farseer a big buff to be competitive. In the late game, oftentimes, especially when there's Dispel on the opponent's side, the wolves can be pretty much useless. In that case, perhaps Farsight could be good, and there's a lot of ways to buff him. Attack speed, for example, damage, or intelligence. I think I like intelligence the most because it makes sense thematically. the faster he uses Farsight, he sees something, something is revealed to him, he becomes smarter, right? That's, I think, what seems pretty cool. I'm not sure if this would be good enough to make him viable. This is also something that, like, I have a tough time realizing, like, what's actually good. What would make it good enough to be better than Wolves or Chain Lightning, right? Like, what would be the number here? +2 intelligence obviously would be too weak. What if it's +10, +20, +30 intelligence? That's probably too much, right? So this is hard for me to gauge that perfectly. I think that's a good starting point. I don't think it would be too crazy. You have to always remember, this means he doesn't get one of his other abilities. So a skill point is a heavy, heavy, heavy investment. So it comes at a price. You can't get one of the other ones. Yeah. But like I said earlier already, things that are very weak, very underpowered, and not viable, I want to heavily buff to make them see play, hopefully. So, third point, decrease Great Hall build time from 150 to 135 seconds. Main reason for this is Orc is unfortunately the only race who can't fast expand. In the past, Undead couldn't either, but Undead received big buffs to their fast expansion, and that was good. That led to more build diversity. Orcs can't, because the expansion takes too long, and maybe also because they're too heavily reliant on tier 2 early in the game, map control and all that. But yeah, 2.5 minutes is pretty crazy. Undead expansion, the Haunted Goldmine in the past was reduced build time wise, and that had very good effects. So I think also reducing this would be very good. It's, if you think about perhaps a bit concerning balance-wise in the matchup against human, where Orc already is favored, and they normally always nowadays go for tier 2 expo. But of course there, headhunters should be nerfed, TC aura should be nerfed. So this then would make sense, in my opinion. All right, and here comes one of the first big creative changes, suggestions from me. The Witch Doctor. Just like a lot of other things I already mentioned, the Witch Doctor is very, very, very bad and never sees play, basically. We only very rarely see him being used for map hack, for sentry wards, which are kind of dumb game design, to be honest. You shouldn't be able to walk one unit over the map and see everything at all times. Sentry wards are way too good. So this is going to be weird. At first, I'm going to suggest super nerfing sentry wards because they're kind of BS and map hack is not cool. But I want to have the other spells heavily, heavily buffed to make him playable and not just as a vision hack. So, here we go. My suggestion. To nerf sentry wards by reducing their duration from 600 to 180 seconds, reducing their sight range from 1600 to 1000, and making them grant 30 experience points when killed. And if you remember, this would make them exactly like the item. The sentry ward item already only lasts 180 seconds, which is appropriate. Imagine if the sentry wards lasted 10 minutes. Ridiculous. So, also kind of weird, right? That Blizzard, with the item, they realized that 10 minutes was way too much, but with the Witch Doctor, they kind of ignored it. Maybe because he was so bad already. But yeah, sentry wards are way, 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 way too good. They need to be much weaker, and they need to grant experience. The same point as with the item earlier. So, this would be a big nerf to the Witch Doctor, honestly. But now, we come to the big buffs. So, I think firstly, his Master and Adept skill should be swapped. Making the heal wards the Adept ability for the Witch Doctor and reducing the mana cost from 200 to 140. So at the moment, of course, heal wards are the Master upgrade. They cost 200 mana. That is half his HP pool on Master Training, where he has 400 mana. So on Adept Training, heal wards should be available to give him more fight impact, to give him more recovery impact. Serpent wards, no, excuse me, what's it called? Stasis traps simply are not reliable. They're kind of clunky. They're kind of weird. So yeah, they just don't do anything, basically. So he should have heal wards on Adept. And of course, half of 300 mana would be 150 mana. But I think it should be 140 mana because his mana regen, of course, also is going to be lower on Adept Training compared to Master Training. Yeah. This is also a bit of a question mark, because nobody knows how heal wards on tier 2 are gonna look. Like, what's that gonna mean for timings? What's that gonna mean for creeping? What's that gonna mean for economy, if maybe you don't need salves anymore? What's that gonna mean for fighting, pushing, falling back, healing up? Big question mark. But worth the risk for the discovery, because witch doctors are unfortunately completely useless at the moment, with a very small exception. So yeah, I think this would give a lot of new opportunities to the witch doctor. And finally, make stasis trap the master spell. I describe it here as making stasis traps the master ability for the witch doctor and giving it a new aura effect. 0.4 mana regeneration in a 500 AoE around stasis traps for allies, and increasing mana cost from 100 to 150, but reducing the stun duration from 6 and 2.5 to 5 and 2. So the problem with stasis traps is that you can place them plenty around, and most of the time they don't do anything. Very rarely they go off, but normally they don't. So I think it's still cool to have a spell like a stasis trap, where it's like a, it's not exactly high risk, high reward, but it's a low probability of being effective. I think that's cool, but to make it viable, it also needs to have a small component of always being effective. You know what I mean? Like, there's the high risk or low probability possibility that something cool will happen, right? Big stun, big AoE disable. But that's unlikely, because normally they get dispelled. But it also needs to have a small component of something that it always provides, that it always gives. And I think here the Witch Doctor could take over the role of the regen master. Like statues are that for Undead, I think the Witch Doctor could, additionally to having heal wards, also provide mana regen. Also, Orc is kind of the only race that really struggles with mana regen, right? Humans have aura, Undeads have statues, and Nightelfs have moonwells. So I think giving Orc something for mana regen could be really good. However, this number is also very hard to properly lock down. Mana regen, if it's very high, is crazy good. We see that with Brilliance Aura. We saw that with the old Khadgar's Pipe of Insight. So something like 0.75 would be way, way, way too much, in my opinion. At the moment, Khadgar's Pipe of Insight is 0.5, and this was already a really good move. This item was way too good in the past, now it's pretty good. But of course, also the Khadgar's Pipe of Insight always moves with your army, so you always get the benefit, always, of the aura. With the stasis traps, it would be a bit different. You only get the benefit if you're standing next to them, especially in a defensive position. Maybe that could be very good. You have to be smart about your movement. This gives players a lot more stuff to think about and to properly execute. So I think 0.4 mana would be good. It's almost as good as a Khadgar's Pipe, but it's also a master ability, obviously, and it's only in certain positions where you're going to get the effect. Now, this is just me estimating. This is just me spitballing. This might be too much. This might be too much. I don't think it's too little. I don't think that it's too little. I think 0.4 certainly would be good, but maybe it's too much. Maybe it has to be 0.3 or 0.2, but 0.2 really isn't much. So I would expect 0.3 or 0.4 should be the right ballpark, kind of. But like I said at the beginning, with all of these suggestions, it's very, very hard to estimate how good exactly this is going to be. But yeah, I think this would make the Witch Doctor way more viable and finally give him more than just one useful spell. All right, moving on. Make the Shaman's Lightning Shield also grant +1 armor. Yeah, that's just simply because Lightning Shield is pretty bad. Purge is good. Bloodlust is really good, if you ever get there. But Lightning Shield is pretty crap. We sometimes see it against Nightelf, on the Blade Master, maybe on Illusions, maybe on some Grunts. But it's not really very good. I think decreasing mana cost wouldn't do much for Lightning Shield, because even if you see a lot of Lightning Shield, it still doesn't do much, simply, in my opinion. And also against Nightelf, oftentimes you have plenty of mana on the Shaman anyways. Mana doesn't seem to be the problem, oftentimes. So I think giving it a bit of a boost to the units that towards your units that receive it would be nice. 1 armor is a little bit. It's 6% EHP. It's not much. It's just a bit. So I think this would be a good benefit, a secondary benefit to the lightning shield. It could make things perhaps a little weird if you're trying to spam lightning shield on the opponent, right? Archers in the back have mass lightning shield. Now they have 1 more armor if you try to kill them. But I think that's a trade worth taking. I think having more armor on your tankier units is going to be still much better. And whether the archers in the back have 1 more armor, maybe doesn't matter that much. Yeah, I think that would be a good change. And reduce, next point. Reduce Blade Master's mirror image mana cost from 80 to 65. I love mirror image. As you guys probably know if you watch my casts, I think it's a super cool ability. I think it's amazing. It's great utility. And against Nightelf, we see it a lot because it breaks you out of Entangle and it breaks you out of Acid Bomb as well, and also disjoints shots. So there it's very good. But it's still not a very good ability in contrast to the others. In Orc Mirror, if we do see a Blade Master, it's never mirror image because crit and Windwalk are just needed too much, and they're just simply too much better. Jesus Christ. Oh, wait, that actually made sense. Too much better. And against Undead, of course, also we never ever see mirror image. It's always about the damage, more crit, more Windwalk, backstab damage, and all that. So yeah, I think mirror image could be reduced even more. It already was reduced mana-wise from 100, but I think it should be reduced even more to make it even more viable. I guess this would also be a small buff to Orc versus Nightelf. A little bit. It's not that huge of a deal, though, I think. I think this will especially help early game, where if you go mirror image on level 1 or 2, you can use it a lot for scouting. But, you know, if normally against Nightelf we see mirror image in the late game, at which point the Blade Master's level 4 normally always anyways, and he has plenty of mana anyways. So I think this would be mainly for early game builds a good idea. And since I was thinking about Blade Master mana already, reduce the Blade Master's Blade Storm mana cost from 200 to 125. And this again, something that I said earlier. Stuff that's really cool and really flashy should also be really good, or at least usable. Blade Storm is one of the coolest abilities in the game. Its power level is like okay. If you use it against buildings, it's actually very good, because when something cannot move against Blade Storm, it's very strong. But normally we see it against like hunts and archers. But if the Night Elf moves their hunts and their archers and uses the heal scroll, not that big of a deal. So honestly, it's not that strong of an ultimate. So I think just reduce the mana cost so that when you get level 6, that you can actually use it and maybe have some mana left for something else. And just like I love mirror image, I also love Taurens. And Taurens are pretty weak. We never see them. You can't play them against Undead because they're too slow to get to. They take too long. We never see them against human because they get slowed, they get disabled. They can't really use pulverize too well because attack speed's slow. We never see them against Night Elf either because, well, you don't have time. You're going to be dead way before. And in Orc Mirror, funnily enough, in Orc Mirror we sometimes see them, very rarely. Although I guess nowadays in Fast-tier meta, actually we don't. Yeah, I guess we don't. In Blade Master meta though, we saw them very rarely. So yeah, I think Taurens could need a buff. And Tauren low mobility, slow movement speed has been a big problem for them for a long time. So I would suggest that upon researching the Pulverize upgrade, Taurens also receive increased movement speed by 30. Like Frenzy Ghouls get more movement speed and more attack speed, I would also like to see the Taurens get more move speed. For Frenzy Ghouls, it's plus 80 move speed, which would be way too much, obviously. Or is it even more? No, I think it's plus 80 move speed on the ghouls. Yeah, that would be, of course, too crazy for Taurens. Plus 30 is around 10%. It's not that much, but it would certainly help. Like, I mean, obviously, this would be a big buff. This would be a big buff. But I think also one that Taurens could use. And in comparison, Knights, who are the fastest tier 3 melee tank unit, they have 350 move speed. So Knights would still be way faster than Taurens. But this would make torrents much more playable, of course. I don't know if it would be good enough to make them playable. I doubt it would make them too strong. But again, hard to tell. Could certainly use some testing first. All right, Paladin. We talked about this earlier. Here I said earlier that I think Paladin needs a Divine Shield nerf if he gets his movement speed increased. And I, as an Undead player, know that all too well. Paladin first, Acolyte Harass is one of the most annoying things. What Blizzard didn't realize when they made the game is that stuff that is completely unkillable and you can't touch it and you can't do anything about is a very bad idea. Invul potions for 7 seconds is okay, but having anything invulnerable for too long or for an eternity is a bad idea. So, yeah, I guess this is the way I make my case here. I say at the beginning, increase Paladin movement speed from 290 to 320. And again, this is a huge buff, huge, that everyone should be able to understand. But rebalance Divine Shield by reducing its duration from 15, 25, and 35 seconds to 10, 15, 20 seconds. And reducing the cooldown from 35, 50, 65 seconds to 30, 35, 40 seconds. So, you can see this as a buff and a nerf at the same time. And I guess this is not immediately apparent. But you guys might not know this, but Divine Shield, when you level it up at the moment, it increases duration, but it also increases the downtime. So, seconds-wise, the window between Divine Shields actually increases. So, percentage-wise, well, it might remain the same. But, yeah, seconds, as far as seconds go, the window increases. Because at the moment, the cooldown increased from 35 to 50 to 65 seconds, right? But with my suggestion, with reducing Divine Shield duration, also don't increase the cooldown so much. So the downtime window would remain the same with Divine Shield, with the cooldown being a lot lower. 30, 35, 40 seconds. And yeah, this is something that I think is just outdated game design. You can't just have units invulnerable for 35 seconds at a time. You know, that's just ridiculous. And I also mentioned, I guess I explained that here. Increasing the Paladin's movement speed would greatly improve his viability as a first hero, something that human is desperately in need of right now, as they are currently the only race that is forced to always play the same hero, Archmage. With that huge movement speed buff, however, the Paladin could be played in a very annoying way by just leveling up level 2 Divine Shield quickly and then harassing invulnerably, a playstyle that is very frustrating and non-fun to play against. For that reason, Divine Shield should be rescaled to have less duration but also less cooldown downtime. This change would move the hero to a much healthier spot in the meta. So overall, I guess this would still be a bit of a nerf to Divine Shield, even if the downtime window is smaller. But overall, it would still be a huge Paladin buff. Movement speed increase is absolutely huge. All right. And second point. And I will readily admit that this one is one of my weirder suggestions that I also made a long time ago. This one is aimed at weakening Breaker Mirror and disincentivizing Breaker Mirror by super buffing Footmen against Breakers. So that when you go tier 3 as the human not making Breakers, you can make Footies to counter the Breakers. And this is the way I suggest to do it. Give Footmen a new tier 2 upgrade called Broadened Shields with 50-50 cost, gold and lumber, and research time of 70 seconds available on tier 2. When this upgrade is researched, Defend also protects against ranged normal damage in addition to the reduction against ranged piercing damage. Note: Human Mirror has been suffering from mass spellbreakers, aka Breaker Wars, for more than a decade now. The magic immune units are so strong and utterly oppressive in this matchup that they snuff out almost all strategic variety. Which is a shame, as Human Mirror on tier 3 can be so entertaining. To combat this, the Footman should be given a new upgrade against the Mass Breaker style. The wonderful part about this upgrade is that it would be relevant would only be relevant against spellbreakers and to a minor extent against huntresses. But hunts aren't even viable against human in the first place, which is why it is not much of a consideration. But for the rare case where they are played, the long research time of 70 seconds would give the Nightelf ample time to react and transition. Yeah, so this is a bit on the unusual side. Some people might even call it a bit on the clunky side, but I think it would be very effective. As I said, defend buff upgrade on tier 2, where then against normal damage, importantly, ranged normal damage, you also get the reduction along with ranged piercing damage. That means that breakers would do very little damage against footies when they attack, and also they would throw damage back. And there's only one more unit in the game that has ranged normal damage, and that is the Huntress. And I imagine some Night Elves, especially Star-Shaped, will be getting very concerned here and will be thinking, oh my god, what can I do against footies? But I think that's nonsense. I think even without Huntresses, you can deal with footies fine. You have the Panda, you have the Keeper, maybe a Demon Hunter, maybe an Orb, maybe a Naga. There's plenty of ways to do it. And like I said, if you do have Huntresses and you need them for a time to deal with footies for a window, the long research time should help give the Night Elves time to react to possibly this if it was an issue. 70 seconds, very long time to research. But I don't even think it would be an issue. I guess you could also point out that there's one more thing that does ranged melee damage, and that is the Avatar of Vengeance from the Warden. But I mean, you know, it's level 6, it's an ultimate. It doesn't really matter at that point in the game against footmen. So yeah, I think this would help footies a ton against breakers. And it's such a shame, man. It's such a shame that we haven't been able to move away from Breaker Mirror. Human Mirror without breakers, if it's tier 3, is by far the best, most enjoyable, coolest mirror matchup in the game. But unfortunately, breakers are too strong, and breakers kill the enjoyability of that matchup. And as you might remember, earlier I suggested a slight nerf to breakers, and buffs to tier 3, and now a buff to footmen to counter breakers. All that put together, I think, might finally extinguish the goddamn breaker wars. All right, next point. Reduce blacksmith lumber costs from 60 to 40. This would help make the paladin plus rifleman strategy more viable. Pretty obvious, right? At the beginning, the human needs too many resources for pally plus rifles. If the blacksmith is 20 gold cheaper, pally rifles is going to be better. I don't know if it's going to be good enough to be viable, but it's certainly going to be better. It's going to buy you a lot of time, which is always very effective. So yeah, this is a very safe change as well that could encourage more build diversity. Fourth point, reduce Staff of Sanctuary gold cost from 250 to 200. I think I mentioned this earlier already against Undead. And yeah, it's another buff to human that especially encourages more tier 3 play, and also helps embolden humans who go tier 3 against breakers. So I think this again makes a lot of sense. And 5, and this is I'm not entirely sure about this one, but let me read it. Triple the sight range of mechanical critter and give it an ability to explode, with which it does 100 damage to enemies in a 150 range AoE. So I think the first part should definitely be done, tripling the sight range, because mechanical critters are kind of supposed to be little disguised, scout units that you can trick your opponent with. But the thing is, they're scout units, and their vision range is so small, it's a joke. So the vision range definitely has to be increased. But I would just like to see the mechanical critter be a good unit, just to be a good unit. But I think just if it has more range, it's not going to be good. It needs something else. And this is the idea that I thought was funny and kind of cool, as it's a bit of an homage to the campaign, right? Remember when in the campaign, if you mass click the critters on the ground and they explode in a fiery explosion. I don't think they actually did damage, but yeah, if they had an ability like that, I think that would be cool. There's other ways to do it as well. You could give them like a short speed boost They have like one ability, you give them a speed boost, and then they run fast for like 10 seconds. Or you could make them invisible. No, wait. Invisible is not good. If you can make them invis and staff onto them, that's too much cancer. Maybe they could have like a short borrow duration or something. I haven't come up with a really cool idea. Maybe you guys could come up with a cool mechanical critter idea. But I mean, I like homages. I like explosions. I think it would be funny if it was an explosion. I think 100 damage in a small AoE wouldn't be too good. You know, especially if you see critters running around and you're like, is that a real critter? You could still just kill it, you know? Yeah, I think this would be interesting. But there might be better buffs than the explosion. This is something where I think really you guys could come up with a better idea. All right, 6th point. Final point for human. Buff the Blood Mage by reducing Flame Strike mana cost from 135 to 130, making it so that banished allies are not affected by the movement speed slow, and decreasing the Phoenix HP degeneration from 25 to 10. So this is only a small buff, obviously, because, well, Blood Mage almost never reaches level 6 in the first place, but it's always annoying that when you have the Phoenix out, which is so cool, which is probably the coolest ultimate in the game, Phoenix and Starfall, that it's got so much downtime. It's flying around, it's doing a bit of damage, and then it has to land. It goes up, it flies around, does a bit of damage, has to land. So I think the HP degeneration should be decreased. Flame Strike, also a very cool spell, but not super strong. I mean, it's okay, but not amazing. A slight buff with a bit less mana could be good. This would be the biggest buff to the Blood Mage. At the moment, you guys know how Banish works. Units become ethereal. That means they can't be attacked by normal right clicks anymore, but they also take more magic damage and they receive more healing. Cool spell. Very interesting. Not all that good. And this would make it a lot better. If you use Banish passively to save your units, if they don't get movement speed slowed, they would be much easier to micro and to move into a good position. This is something also that was done with Purge in the past. In the past, when you used Purge on your allies, they still would get slowed. Nowadays, they don't anymore. You just purge them and they're fine to go. You can micro them well. It makes it way, way better. This would be a big buff to the Blood Mage, to the Banish, and would be a step in the right direction. This might, I'm not sure about that, but this might also make him more viable as a first hero. Maybe. Which again is something that we should try to encourage, as the humans can only play Archmage at the moment. Alright. That was it for human, and now we come to Nightelf. And this I talked about earlier already. The Demon Hunter. I went at length into this earlier when I said that mana burn is bad. It's bad game design. It's annoying. It's anti-fun. It shouldn't be in a game, honestly. So that's why I wanted the mana burn to be nerfed. And this is the big buff that I want to see to compensate for it. To make the Demon Hunter cool, finally, and to give him a less headache-inducing role. Alright, here it is. Increase the Demon Hunter's immolation damage from 10, 15, 20 to 11, 22, 33 DPS, and reduce the mana per second cost from 7 to 5. It would also be great if the damage tick interval, which means the frequency at which damage is dealt from immolation, could be changed from 1.0 to 0.5 seconds. This would give much more control to the player for proper execution. So of course you guys know how immolation works. There's fire around a Demon Hunter. Everything around him takes a certain amount of damage per second. And the way it works at the moment is the damage ticks every 1 second, which is not exactly good. Lightning Shield, for example, ticks way faster. And the shorter the damage instances, the closer the damage instances are to each other, the better you can position and micro, and the damage comes in more reliably, I guess. So yeah, that's a huge buff. That's a 10% damage buff on level 1. How much is that on level 2? That's almost a 50% damage buff on level 2. Honestly, this looks kind of crazy. And it's more than a 50% damage buff on level 3. So it would be... and it's also a mana cost decrease by like 30% or something. This would be a gigantic buff. But honestly, I don't even think it would be OP. Because of how terrible Immolation is at the moment. You also have to consider Immolation doesn't just, do damage, it also depletes the Demon Hunter's mana, which means the Moonwells are taxed way more, and Moonwells are a very important resource for the Night Elf. So yeah, this is the craziest buff, numbers-wise, that I've included in this whole patch notes thing. But I think it needs to be crazy to actually make Immolation playable. And I talked about this before. Basically, what I'm saying here is mana burn is bad. Mana burn, no good. Mana burn, bad for every game. Yeah, I want to see that. I want to see the Demon Hunter finally become a cool, fun, flashy hero instead of the annoying abomination that it is right now. Abomination isn't exactly the right word. I couldn't come up with the right word. All right, we're almost finished, boys. 2 more pages, and then we're done. Almost 2 hours in. All right. So, what do we have here? Potom. Potom, a pretty straightforward hero, a little bit too one-dimensional. My guess until this day is still that Potom was the first hero designed by Blizzard before they knew how to make cool heroes. But I think the Potom still leads to interesting playstyles. So I would like to see her buffed in certain ways and some spells reworked in certain ways. And this is how I would do it. Firstly, increasing her nighttime vision from 800 to 1900. At the very beginning, when I talked about Ultra Vision, I mentioned that I think there should be another way for Night Elf to have very good night vision outside of Ultra Vision in a limited case. And that's the Potom. I think the Potom, as the only hero in the game, should have more nighttime vision than daytime vision. And I think it's pretty cool. It's very unique strategically, and it fits her thematically because she's a huntress of the night. She's on a tiger, and she's row, and she's, prowling in the shadows. Rrr, all that stuff. She can also hide in the shadows. So I think this would be cool. Again, a bit inspired by Dota. In Dota, there are a few heroes that have very high night vision. I think like Slark and Night Stalker and stuff. Maybe some others. So yeah, I think this would be great. I think this would be really cool. Yeah. I don't know how exactly it works with Ultra Vision. What it says in the tooltip is that at Ultra Vision, Night Elf units get as much vision during nighttime as daytime. I don't know exactly how that's implemented in the game. If it means that just adds like something on top of the night vision, then this would be pretty crazy. Then it would be 1,000 more vision range. Then it would be 2,900 range, which would be kind of crazy. But I think it would still be kind of cool. Imagine if there's like one hero at daytime with 2,900 vision range. That also, I guess, would have to be tested. But I think it's a cool concept. I think really this is a very cool concept. Secondly, Searing Arrow. Reduce mana cost from 8 to 5. Searing Arrow is one of the worst arrows in the game. Not arrows, orbs. One of the worst orbs in the game, right? Orb of Corruption is way better. Orb of Venom is way better. Naga, Orb of Frost is way better. But it can be pretty good, especially if you get the Potom to level 5, level 4, level 5, maybe even level 7 in some crazy world. That's pretty good. Also, this buffs her against Demon Hunter, which is good. We don't just want to see Demon Hunter bears every game, because if she gets mana burn, she more frequently will be able to shoot out arrows again for more damage. Searing Arrow is still not a very good orb. It's not a very good attack, also because the Potom's attack speed is so low. But it makes it a bit better. It helps her against Demon Hunter, and also might help a bit with Moonwell recovery if she has more mana. I imagine most of the time she's still going to be out of mana, but maybe every now and then. All right, thirdly, increasing the damage per wave of Starfall from 50 to 75. That is a big buff. That is 50% more damage. That's a big deal. But I think it's appropriate. Starfall is an ultimate, obviously. It's very flashy. It's very cool. Also, it can be counterplayed pretty easily. But yeah, it doesn't do enough for being an ultimate. Interestingly enough, I found this in the old patch notes. Starfall actually used to do 75 damage before it was nerfed to 50 damage. And I think this was absolutely an over nerf. I think it should be 75. It should be strong. It should be cool. It should be flashy. And thirdly, one of the worst spells in the game, in terms of game design, the Owl Scout. The Owl Scout is very, 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 very weird. In most games, it does nothing. It helps you 0 for fighting. It just looks around. It doesn't help empower you. And in some other games, it's insanely good to give you detection and vision everywhere. It is unkillable, it is spammable, and you get map hack with it, which is way too... what's the word? Something with polar. Polarizing. Way too polarizing. It's either is way too good in one thing and way too terrible and useless in another aspect. Way too good at scouting and way too terrible at helping you fight. So, my suggestion is completely rework the owl. And I would do it with 5 different ways. Giving the owl the unique passive ability that it creates perpetual nighttime around itself. Oh, we're back. Sorry, I had to stop the recording for a moment, but we're right back. I was talking about the Owl Scout. So yeah, change the Owl Scout completely by A, giving the owl the unique passive ability that it creates perpetual nighttime around itself. Shout out to Neo here, who came up with this idea. I was really struggling to come up with ideas for the owl, but Neo had a really cool one, and that is when the owl is out in an AoE around itself, it always has nighttime, which is kind of similar to the concept of Night Stalker from Dota, sort of. I think it's very cool. Very, very unique. Daytime manipulation, very rare. We only have it in Moonstone form, other than that. And I think that's brilliant. I think that's a great idea. Make the owl always create nighttime. Also perfectly fits the bottom, right? She's a nighttime hero. She is, yeah. She's the lady of the night. And also the huntresses, of course, who are alongside her normally. So, that's the first thing. It creates nighttime around itself, always. But of course, that wouldn't really be enough, because that means at nighttime itself, it's kind of useless, right? So, second effect, give the owl an aura with which it heals allies for 0.75, 1.5, and 2.25 HP per second. It's a bit of healing that the Pawnum and Hunts oftentimes need very badly, but it's not that much. It is a little bit more than the DK aura. Unholy aura is 0.5, 1.0, and 1.5 HP regen per second. But of course also gives movement speed bonus, which is extremely strong. So I think this should be good, but not OP. But again, this is just like earlier, hard to tell exactly how good it would be. Would have to be tested first. We're not done with the changes yet though, because like I said earlier, things that are entirely invulnerable and you can do nothing about are very, very stupid. Just like Water Wards, just like Divine Shield that lasts too long, just like, I don't know, Potion of Divinity is also kind of dumb. Invulnerability has to be removed, and then also accordingly HP have to be increased to 300, 400, and 500. Also, the cooldown needs to be changed. The Potom Owl, the way it is at the moment, is too spammable. You could have way too many of them out at the same time. It used to be 20 second cooldown and 60, 90, 120 second duration, so you could have a million owls out at the same time. That is not good. Not good. Especially if you consider that they create nighttime, which means if you could just have one owl always being in your main base, always regenerating moon juice during daytime, that would be too good. So the owls have to be very limited in how many you can have out. So for that reason, I want to increase the cooldown from 20 seconds to 40 seconds and reduce the duration to only 60 seconds. Don't increase the duration. Which means there's going to be a short window where you can have 2 owls out at the same time, but not for long. And yeah, I think this would make the owl very interesting, maybe finally playable, and remove a lot of annoying aspects of the owl. I've heard Toxie say that if you can just keep an owl in your base to heal Moonwells, it might be too good. I don't know about that. It's still a skill point that you have to invest. Maybe even 2 skill points. Maybe just 1 skill point. I don't know. Skill point investment is a big deal. But yeah, this would have to be tested. This is such a wild idea. This would certainly have to be tested. All right. Now going on towards another unit that is criminally underplayed, but also problematic at the same time, the Druid of the Talon. Very weird unit that I think I'm just going to read what I wrote down here. I think that might be explaining it the best. So, these are the changes that I envision. Firstly, increasing the damage by 1. Secondly, removing the vision and true sight aspect of Fairy Fire and instead making affected targets receive 20% reduced healing. Thirdly, increasing Cyclone mana cost from 150 to 225. As a fourth point, making the Talon give a 10% attack speed buff to allies in a 300 AoE radius from where it takes flight. And E, applying Fairy Fire to all enemies in a 175 AoE of where the Talon lands. And these are definitely some of the wilder changes that I suggest here in this document, but I think I have some good reasoning for it, and I'm going to try to explain it here. The Druid of the Talon is one of the rarest played units in the game, but when we do see him, it is only in mass numbers against Orc, where the entire Nightelf fight strategy revolves around cycloning everything up in the air and the Orc not having the ability to play the game anymore. Additionally, the Crow form ability serves literally 0 purpose. All that is to say that the Talon is in a very bad spot right now. With the changes that I described here, the dots could serve in a more interactive and interesting supporter role, with their ability to buff allies and debuff opponents, and having some cool micro options to do that as well. With those buffs, however, Cyclone would have to be severely nerfed, hence the mana cost increase. So yeah, I think it's pretty understandable. The Talon could be cool to have as a supporting unit with just a few of them, not masses of them. Firstly, it's extremely annoying and frustrating as Orc to play against mass Talons. It's extremely hard to do, whereas the execution for the Nightelf is pretty easy. Also, on honestly every level, even on the top level, Talons, if they get off to a good start, are, I would say, a bit OP against Orc. And they can only be played there. Nowhere else do we ever see them. So this means the Talons in the meta are not in a good spot. And whenever there's a unit that can disable other units and remove the ability to micro and to play, essentially, that is not really good design. So what you want to have is just a few of them and maybe a bit of disable, but not just pure mass disable. This is why I suggest the mana cost increase of Cyclone. Cyclone is a pretty frustrating and not a very fun and interactive spell, kind of like Mana Burn. So it needs to be nerfed, and in my opinion. But it gets buffed in other ways. More damage and reduced healing if Fairy Fire is applied. Now, reduced healing can be very strong. How strong exactly is this going to be? Tough to say. It's not that much of a healing reduction, I guess. Orb of Fire is minus 35% healing. This is minus 20%. Is this good enough? Is this too much? I don't know. But just like also with Owl and Sentry Wards, having permanent vision always is also a little bit dumb. That's why I want to remove the vision and true sight aspect of it. Especially if the Orc doesn't have Dispel, which normally he does, but maybe sometimes he can't afford it. Being able to see everything all the time is not good. Not good. So, that's why vision and true sight has to be removed, and healing reduction could be introduced. This is an interesting mechanic that I think we see too little of in Warcraft 3. And this one, of course, is the wildest thing, this AoE buff. So the problem with Crow Form is it doesn't do anything. Crow Form anti-air isn't good enough. Plus also, it has a way better counterpart, because hippogriffs are basically always the better anti-air. Almost always. Crow Form just isn't strong enough. But also, you don't really want to give the talents ground attack, because that would just make them like gargoyles, sort of. Also, their attack can't be high, because they can become air units too quickly, right? You can't get air units too quickly and give them good damage. So I don't think they should have ground attack when they're in the air, but there should be another way to make Crow Form viable. And this is my suggestion. To make it viable, but only in small numbers and not really valuable in big numbers. That's why it's AoE buffs and debuffs, right? So when you lift up in the air, when you take flight, you increase the attack speed from your allies. Whether you have 2 talents to do this, or you have 10 talents to do this, it doesn't really matter. It's the same effect, essentially. And I think this is important. And then also, when you fly over towards the enemy and you land, again, it's an AoE ability that affects everything, so it doesn't matter that much whether you have 2 or 3 talents or 10. Now, the thing is, when the talent lands, it's basically a suicide mission. It's definitely gonna die, so it has to be a pretty strong effect. And applying Fairy Fire to everything in an AoE, I think, could be the right thing to do. But this is mostly just me spitballing. This is just me theorizing. If this is actually gonna be good at all, or too good, hard to say. But 2 things are clear. Firstly, Cyclone is pretty cancer and should be nerfed. Ideally, I would like Cyclone removed and replaced with another spell. But I'm not creative enough, I guess, to think of a completely new spell. So, buff Talon in different ways, but super nerf Cyclone, I think, is the right way to go. That's the first thing. And secondly, the Talon is too weak in almost every matchup. So, and the reason why he's so good against Orc is because of Cyclone. So if he gets nerfed in the Cyclone, but buffed in the other ways, that hopefully, in theory, that's my goal, is going to make him playable in many more matchups and viable while not being OP. But how exactly, how strong this would make the Talon, I mean, that's impossible to say. But it's worth trying, in my opinion. All right, we're almost done. So, last point for the Keeper of the Grove. Thorns Aura. Worst aura in the game. Needs a buff. So, 10, 20, 30 is how much it is at the moment. 15, 30, 45 would be very reasonable, in my opinion. This aura is so bad, could use a big buff. This could honestly turn out to still be too weak. Hard to tell, but this would be a step in the right direction that I think wouldn't be too strong. All right, Undead. The 4th and final race before we get to neutral for their suggestions. So, change the Death Knight's ultimate Raise Dead by making the summoned units not be invulnerable anymore, but rather giving them 40 armor instead, and also making those summons grant 30 experience each when killed. So this is another one of those Blizzard made something that was invulnerable and was a bad idea examples. Funnily enough, the fact that it's invulnerable, the units, actually makes this ultimate worse. If the units had armor and were attackable, then they would soak up damage from an A-clicking army, which at the moment they don't. Of course, you get the damage from the units, but oftentimes it's dryads, of which you don't get the effect. Oftentimes it's bears, who can't morph into master form, or it's something like, I don't know, knights, who don't have sunring blades. So it's just, it's a bad ultimate. It is probably, by far, the worst ultimate in the game. And yeah, I think if we don't make them invulnerable, but give them 40 armor, that would be pretty cool. Because then, even if they don't do damage, which most of the time they don't really do damage, they could still absorb damage very well. Especially if the opponent doesn't micro against it, which also encourages the opponent to micro well. And it could also still be dispelled, or ignored. 40 armor, by the way, for reference, is an EHP increase compared to 0 armor of, how much is it? 240%, right? Yeah. 240% EHP increase, which is definitely big. But it also means you can then dispel them if you have enough dispel, hard to tell. And because they're summons that you can kill, they would have to give experience. Alright. Second point. Buff the Dreadlord by increasing Carrion Swarm level 2 damage from 125 to 140 and the damage cap from 700 to 840, and increasing the Dreadlord's base agility from 16 to 20. I mentioned this earlier already in the part of Undead versus Human. And yeah, it's pretty simple. Dreadlord is one of the worst heroes in the game. Dreadlord and Firelord are the worst heroes in the game, to be precise. And yeah, he needs a buff, so that's why. Thirdly, decrease Cannibalize gold cost from 75 to 50 and decrease research time from 30 to 20 seconds. Same thing again. Cannibalize, we never see it. It's a pretty bad upgrade. Honestly, it's not that bad of an upgrade. It's just too expensive. It takes too long. You need to do ghoul production, or you need to save resources for your tech or something. It's just simply not worth it. So to see it viable, make it easier to research. And here, fourth is one of my more creative suggestions again. So this one concerns the Necromancer, another unit that is not viable currently. My suggestion to make him viable is add a single target Dispel, dealing 300 damage to summons to the Necromancer's Unholy Frenzy ability. This Dispel would be applied right before the Unholy Frenzy buff was activated, similar to how Purge works. Meaning first there is the Dispel, followed directly by the buff, and increase the mana cost of Unholy Frenzy from 50 to 60. So this is designed to encourage different playstyles from the Undead. Undead are normally always reliant on Destroyers because they're only form of Dispel. And secondly, they're also reliant on Tier 3 because they need Dispel from Destroyers. This would make it so that Undead could get Tier 2 Dispel from Unholy Frenzy. Not an AoE Dispel, it would be a single target Dispel, with which you can dispel allies or opponents. Interesting here, or important, I should say, to note, if you dispel opponents, you still give them the Unholy Frenzy buff. So you have to be careful about what you want to dispel. This would also give Undeads another way of dealing with summons, but it would be weaker than Shaman Purge, for example. Shaman Purge is 400 damage, right? Yeah, 400 damage against summons. This would only be 300 damage. This would also perhaps mean that Undeads can move away from focus fire strategies, where they have to have the orb and they have to have destroyers and attack everything at the same time, and maybe can go to more of a broad army with maybe like ghouls and fiends and skeletons that the necromancers can summon, but this is tough to say if this would be viable. But this would certainly give the necromancer a lot of utility and finally make him more useful and give another means of dispel to the undead. But yeah, of course, because the spell would be a lot stronger, also the cost would have to be increased. So the fine-tuned numbers here are also hard to tell. How much damage against summons should it be exactly? How much mana cost should it be exactly? This is something I'm not very sure about, but I think the concept in general, to have a Dispel first, and then the Unholy Frenzy cast, I think is good. I think it's good. But exactly the numbers, I'm not sure about. Alright, fifth point, this is more of a quality of life thing. Give the gargoyles prioritizability 2 different hotkeys for their toggle modes. At the moment, it is the same hotkey, which results in players not being able to give all their gargs a certain command to have a uniform response. It rather just toggles between 2 modes, making it incredibly cumbersome to manage large groups of gargoyles. So this is something, it's a bit complicated to explain. I guess I'm going to explain it in simpler terms. So if you have 5 gargs who have ground attack on, and 5 gargs who have air attack on, you put them all in the same group, and then you click the hotkey, they switch back and forth. They go to ground, they go to air. They go to ground, they go to air. So it should be done in such a way that there's 2 separate hotkeys. You take whatever group of gargs with whatever setting, and you do air attack or ground attack, and they all do the same thing and have the same state, right? And that wouldn't be a buff, but it would just be helpful for managing gargoyles. Point 6. Reduce graveyard build time from 80 to 75 seconds and improve the corpse spawn interval from 15 to 10 seconds. Similar to Blacksmith, this could encourage more diverse builds. Shout out to Save Orcus at this point, who is convinced that new undead builds could emerge with this. And yeah, it might. It might. It would be cool to see different builds. If it doesn't encourage different builds, this is hardly a buff to anything. It's just a little bit faster of a graveyard. Point 7, buff the Crypt Lord by giving Spiked Carapace a new additional effect to grant 1.5, 3, and 4.5 HP regen per second, and by reducing Impale mana cost from 10 to 90. I talked about that earlier. I think the Crypt Lord is a very cool hero that got a little bit too much hate because he was a bit too strong for some time, but now he's a bit too weak, and Spiked Carapace is one of the worst abilities in the game. And yeah, I think it deserves a buff. All right. Now I'm going to talk about the remaining neutral heroes and units. I think it's just heroes, and then we're finally going to be done. So, firstly, give Mana Shield the added effect of increasing the Naga Sea Witch's mana regeneration by 0.5, 1, and 1.5 per second when active, and decreasing the cast requirement from 25 mana to 15 mana. So it's the same thing again. Mana Shield is a useless, horrible spell, so we need to buff it heavily to make it viable. And I think giving it bonus regen makes sense. If you turn on Mana Shield, mana becomes your double resource, so having bonus resource recovery seems to make sense in my mind. Secondly, increase the Beastmaster's strength gain from 2.9 to 3, and increase his intelligence gain from 1.8 to 2. This would, of course, help with the breakpoints tremendously. What this essentially means is that starting from level 2, the Beastmaster would have 1 more strength and 1 more intelligence. Kind of like the Panda, but slightly delayed. And I think that would be good. Beastmaster is only ever viable in one matchup on one map, which is because it's exactly so strong on that one map. So he could use a bit of a buff. I think it's an interesting hero. Good in the early game, good for tempo. Will always fall off, of course, because he's a summons hero. Could use a bit of a buff. IMO. Alright, and this is another wild creative idea here about the Firelord that I have. Namely, give the Firelord's Soulburn a new bonus effect. Before applying the Soulburn status effect, the usage of the ability applies an AoE dispel within a 200 range radius, dealing 200 damage to summons. The area affected is that surrounding the targeted unit. Additionally, Soulburn is now usable on allies. If used on allies, the AoE dispel works the same, but instead of the target receiving a debuff, it receives a buff, where the allied target receives 50% of the usual damage reduction as bonus damage, and 50% of the usual damage over time as healing over time. And additionally, increases agility gain from 1.6 to 3. So, yeah. Firelord, my idea was, isn't it a shame that Dispel is oftentimes so rare to come by? Many races only have 1 or 2 sources of Dispel from units. Why not have 1 hero, or maybe even 2, but you know, 1 hero who can Dispel? Firelord, why not? Firelord, pretty cool hero. Shout out to Hot. But not very good. He's got good right click. He's a good orb carrier, but basically all of his spells are trash. So buffing some of them or giving them new aspects would be good. Problem is you can't really buff lava spawns because in the early game push strategies and push strategies in general, they're already pretty damn good. Incinerate, I don't think it's worth buffing too much because it always competes with the orb anyways, and he is a good orb carrier. So Soulburn. Soulburn is the one. Problem with Soulburn is it can be dispelled. So what you want to have is, upon casting Soulburn, it should have a good effect immediately. And that is Dispel. Dispel, yes sir. And I thought, why not also make it defensively usable? Not just aggressively to silence and stuff, but also to buff one of your units. What about giving Soulburn to a Demon Hunter? More damage, more HP regen, or, I don't know, to Pitlord, you know, lots of possibilities. Honestly, I think this still wouldn't make the spell very good. It's got a long cooldown, of 12 seconds. So it means every 12 seconds you can dispel once, which is not much. So I don't think this would be too good. So I think he needs another buff to actually become viable. And it fits the theme of the Pit Lord, of the Dreadlord, goddammit, the Fire Lord, if you will. His spells are all bad, so why don't we make his stats very good? And this is my suggestion. Also, this makes him very strong as a first hero if he has crazy stat gain. And this would be crazy stat gain, because this would be bonus 1.4 stat gain per level. So plus 3 agi every level. And, spoiler alert, Firelord scales very, very well with levels in terms of attack speed. And of course also damage. Yeah, so I think this will be pretty cool. I'm not sure from a mechanical standpoint if this is really doable. I don't know how the engine works and how the editor works exactly and stuff. But this one certainly would be doable. As I said earlier, Dreadlord and Firelord are the worst heroes in the game. And yeah, I think this would make him quite a bit better. So, next one. Add 30, 40, and 50% movement speed, slow effect to the Dark Ranger's Life Drain ability. Life Drain is another one of those terrible skills that you never see because it's so bad in comparison. So, hence the big buff. Fifth, increase the Alchemist's Chemical Rage duration from 15 to 20 seconds. This would be a big buff for sure. It's a duration increase of Chemical Rage of 33%, and it reduces the downtime between Chemical Rage windows drastically. But I think, again, it's appropriate. Heal Spray used to be OP, now it's good. Acid Bomb used to be OP, now it's good. His ultimate transmute is very, very good, but I mean, we never see that, basically. But Chemical Rage is pretty bad. Chemical Rage is pretty horrible, although it fits the Alchemist's toolkit very well. You know, he's this great alchemist dude. He's got these weird concoctions, and it makes you crazy, it makes you mad. And it's supposed to also make a slow hero dangerous all of a sudden in a short window. It's cool. It's a cool concept, but it's too weak. So I would say increase the duration and see how it goes. I don't think this should be OP, right? I don't think so, but this probably also would have to be tested. Point 6. Add Dust of Appearance to the human and orc shops. Available on tier 1. Yeah, you need detection, oftentimes, against many strategies, and especially as human, you can have a tough time getting to the neutral shop, and it can be out of your way, so it's just very annoying that there's no dust in the shops. I mean, I guess the philosophy of Blizzard was they didn't want to have everything homogenized. They didn't want to have the same stuff in every shop. But you need to have some things in every shop. I mean, we do have heal pots and mana pots in every shop. And also, Dust of Appearance should be in every shop, in my opinion. And the last one, and if I may say, I think this might be my coolest change that is also extremely hard to gauge how it would work out exactly. And this is how it goes. Change Cluster Rocket's ability type and damage type from magic to universal. That way, the Tinker would have a very interesting new role, as he would be the only hero in the game with an ability that works against magic immune units. Now, that is definitely something that would be something completely new. Here, again, I got inspired by Dota. I imagine some Warcraft 3 purists might be of the opinion that spells should never work against magic immune units, and that it doesn't make sense, and that it defeats the purpose. But if you play Dota, you realize that having some very few spells that pierce spell immunity is actually very good, to have specific counters ready at a certain point. And because, of course, there's only one, with this, there would be only one hero in the game who could do this. It has to be a neutral hero, obviously. And I think it has to be the Tinker. It can't be an ability that does too much damage, right? Like, it can't be Breath of Fire that does damage against magic immune, because that would be too much. Cluster Rockets don't do much damage, but they also stun. So, obviously, this would be insanely good against Destroyers and Dryads and Spellbreakers. But yeah, I think it's very worth considering. like I said, very hard to tell how this would play out exactly. But I think it's too interesting not to try out. You know? Alright, and with that, we're at the end. Let me read the last little bit. None of these changes are urgently required to fix current issues within the game. I'm talking about this last bit that I read out here. These would just serve the purpose of exploring underused strategic options within the meta. While the buffs listed here would certainly be significant ones, they should still be within reason, as most of those listed abilities are at this moment severely underpowered. I would point out that to encourage new and interesting playstyles, I think especially the Immolation, Witch Doctor, Broadened Shields, Unholy Frenzy, Paladin, Druid of the Talon, and Firelord changes deserve real consideration. And most of all, the Tinkers. Giving his rockets universal ability and damage type would open up countless possibilities within the game. Alright. That's it. That was the last page. And with that, we're finally through. And I think, what was that? 2.5 hours. Whoo, baby. That took a long time. If you stayed until now, until the very end, then kudos. If not, I imagine most people will have just read the document and not watched this whole video, which is also fine. But yeah, these are my suggestions. I am ready to hear feedback about my suggestions and also to hear other opinions and other suggestions, which are oftentimes very creative and cool and enlightening as well. I have braced myself. I know that I'm going to get also a lot of shit from some people for my suggestions here, but that's fine. That's all right. But yeah, that's it for me, boys. I hope you enjoyed this one. Maybe it can spark some thoughts in your mind. Maybe you guys have some suggestions. Again, if we ever get a new patch, or if there ever is something like a community patch, whatever, it should be a collaborative effort. And yeah, there it is. And with that, we're done. So, thank you guys for watching, and see you again soon.